Could this be it? Could this be the one? An actual great MCU Spider-Man movie? After the disappointing Spider-Man Homecoming and outright awful Far From Home, my hopes for a great Spider-Man movie faded into nothingness. I already talked about my disappointment with the overall character of the MCU Spider-Man in a previous video. You can watch that for an in-depth breakdown of all the reasons I don't like the MCU Spider-Man we were shown up until No Way Home. But for the sake of brevity,
Misplay. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
the fundamentals of Spider-Man's true essence as a character is that he is an independent, sarcastic loner. Prior to No Way Home, MCU Spider-Man has been a needy, subservient sidekick whose sole purpose has been to just be accepted by perceived greater heroes. I didn't really have expectations for No Way Home. I hoped for the best, but was ready to be disappointed again. The idea that this movie could balance all of the elements like improving MCU Spider-Man while bringing back previous Spider-Man and villains seemed like a lot to ask and hope for. Admittedly, incredibly enough, No Way Home successfully brought back characters from previous Spider-Man movies in an effective, respectful way that wasn't just cheap nostalgia bait, while also progressing the character of MCU Spider-Man in a positive way that brings him closer to the Spider-Man of amazing and spectacular origins. No Way Home is a refreshing addition to the pantheon of web-slinging films and sends the wall crawler in an appropriate and long-sought direction. Spoiler alert, I'm talking about Spider-Man No Way Home as if you've seen it already. And judging by the box office receipts, you probably have. No Way Home takes about 30 minutes to kick into gear. Peter fumbles his way into pleading with Doctor Strange to use magic to get everyone to forget he's Spider-Man. The spell gets screwed up by Peter's incessant verbal interference, which unleashes a ferocious 5 of Spider-Man's past villains. The movie is structured at this point akin to a video game. There are a number of villains on the loose, go and capture them all. He does so, but is conflicted with his persistent, have my cake and eat it too complex by wanting to cure these foes of their ill-seeking ways instead of sending them back to their original fate, which for some means death. Spidey steals the magical box that would do this for Strange, and the two engage in a dimension-spanning fight over it. I must say, I'm a sucker for these mirror dimension set pieces. They're a great use of creative CGI that brings the feeling of an MC Escher drawing to life as the backdrop for a superhero fight that also gives both heroes new ways to combat each other. Peter realizes that he's in a realm governed by geometry and flexes his mathematical muscles to neutralize Strange and obtain the box. A brilliant showcase of Spider's smarts and knack for problem solving as a route to victory instead of brute force or pure athleticism. Peter returns to lead all the bad guys to a safe house where he works on curing them of their villainy. In fact, let's talk about the villains here. Quick side note, 2 of my favorite performances of all time would be Michael Caine as Ebenezer Scrooge in A Muppets Christmas Movie and Tim Curry as Long John Silver in Muppets Treasure Island. At a very young age, these 2 legendary renditions made quite an impression on me, as I was watching performances worthy of a serious adult movie. They stand the test of time because either actor could have easily phoned it in and collected a check, but chose instead to give it their all like the sublime thespians they are. Not dissimilar from this situation, I would say, are the performances from Alfred Molina and Willem Dafoe in No Way Home. Disney threw a bunch of money at them and asked if they would return with some de-aged faces for this superhero movie that's for kids and adults like myself to take it way too seriously. The de-aging was really impressive and did compliment Molina, as he was also sounding and acting like he was straight off the set from Spider-Man 2. His arc in this movie goes from his mad scientist ways to then becoming the Otto that befriended Tobey's Parker in Spider-Man 2. Jamie Foxx also brought his A-game and showed what he could do with better material. He brings his patented Jamie Foxx swagger and humor while maintaining the plotting, sinister nature of Electro. The true Oscar-winning caliber performance comes from Willem Dafoe. His transition from confused, inconsistent sufferer of amnesia, Norman Osborn, to straight-up evil Green Goblin was even better than I could have hoped for. They ditched the Goblin helmet early on and allowed the Man of 1,000 Faces to unleash his brilliance and allow his full expressiveness to take over the screen. To make it even better, he's cloaked with vintage Goblin green and purple with hood and all. He pushes MCU Peter to his limits. In the previous MCU Spider-Man movies, Peter never had to go through any real problems that would help build his character. Much to my surprise, Green Goblin rams into Aunt May in front of Spider, leading her to die a very PG death. She hits him with the "with great power comes great responsibility" line, and then dies. I felt 2 ways about this. 1, I'm really glad MCU Spider-Man got this, the loved one dying that he was unable to save, which cements just how serious it is to be a superhero. And 2, I'm not going to lie. When I was watching the movie for the first time, as soon as Aunt May got hit, I thought to myself, finally. No disrespect whatsoever to Marissa Tomei. She's a fantastic actress, but I've absolutely hated this incarnation of May. A MILF who's actually technically more like a GILF, whose only purpose has been to embarrass Pete and play touch butt with Happy's Hogan. Before dying, her character served no purpose in giving Peter the added stress that the original Aunt May figure gave him. It also doesn't really make sense why she would be the one to tell him the great power, great responsibility line. Given how her character's been handled to this point, she's not exactly a bedrock of Confucius wisdom. But it's fine. These characters are who they are 3 movies in, so her introducing that phrase at this point was the most practical choice, I guess. Her dying kickstarts MCU Peter into finally becoming a worthy Spider-Man. As he's overwhelmed with pain and guilt, Peter stands in the rain watching Jameson on a giant TV talk about how everywhere Spider-Man goes, chaos and calamity ensue. This gives me goosebumps. It brings home the conflict Peter feels, wondering if everything Jonah says about him is true. Is he a public menace? This is spiritually right on point with how Jonah would often be used in the original Amazing Spider-Man comics. Stan Lee would be proud. Enter the Spider-Men. We are living in an era wrought with cheap nostalgia-reliant tricks where someone from a beloved franchise is reintroduced into a modern iteration, only to end up as a hollow, disrespectful representation of their past glory. Thank God this is not one of those instances. We are treated to the return of Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire. While Garfield's movies missed the mark, he delivered a sarcastic, witty Spider-Man that made the most of what he was given. He truly is the most valuable Spider in No Way Home. He demonstrates charm and affability, while also revealing that losing Gwen Stacy weighs heavily on him. Notice how we didn't need to see him as a bum or a bitter past his prime Spider-Man to get the point across that he was still in pain. Other franchises handling heralded IP take note. Tobey obviously was the one everyone wanted to see, and see him we did. Looking older, but still fit. I mean, it's been 20 years. I really appreciate that they didn't use de-aging on Tobey. It's okay to get older. It makes sense for Molina and Dafoe to get de-aging treatment. They're both pushing 70, and you needed to maintain the idea that they could take on Spider-Man. Tobey's Parker is still the even-keeled, mild-mannered Peter we last saw 15 years ago who's still trying to do better. Here, he plays to the support role of building up Tom Holland's Peter. And one of my favorite moments of the movie, him giving words of affirmation to Andrew Garfield, telling him he's amazing, after Garfield says he gets down on himself. A great nod and a bit of fourth wall breaking on how Garfield's Spider-Man was initially received in real life. Perhaps my favorite moment of the movie is when MJ falls and MCU Peter can't get to her, and in swoops Garfield to save the day. In the same fashion as when he was too late to save Gwen in Amazing Spider-Man 2. Garfield's Spider is overcome with emotion, but you can tell that he's now gained a semblance of peace via redemption. The Trinity of Spider is used in a variety of ways, which not only further the plot, but also build up MCU Peter after May's death and he's at his lowest. They let him know that they've also lost loved ones, and caution him against allowing his rage to consume him in a vengeful bloodlust. They then work together on making the devices to cure their foes. They swap stories and anecdotes about themselves, further humanizing each other and strengthening the growing bonds of brotherhood. Another great part of the movie, geez, there was a lot of them, was the 3 just hanging around the Statue of Liberty, waiting for the bad guys to show up, and they're just shooting the shit. It gives them an opportunity to talk about Spider-Man problems to people that actually know what it's like. Holland talking about going to space, Andrew cracking Tobey's beleaguered back, Tobey telling him he's amazing. All just wonderful moments that any Spider fan can enjoy. We get our big climactic fight as the Spider-Man one by one cure their nemesis. MCU Peter comes face to face with Goblin and throws haymakers back and forth. And eventually, Peter brings Goblin to his knees. He goes to kill Goblin, bringing his glider down on him, but Tobey stops him, leading MCU Spider to cure Goblin instead. Meanwhile, portals are opening up, leading to more and more villains coming into this universe, so MCU Peter asks Strange to have everyone forget who Peter Parker is, even MJ and Ned, in order to stop this multi-dimensional madness. Finally leading Peter to his true hero journey of being alone with minimal resources. This is who Spider-Man is. The hero that learns by way of personal loss that as a superhero, it takes sacrifice of your own self-interest to do the right thing and protect the people you care about. His decision leaves him friendless, connectionless, living in an apartment listening to a police scanner. Peter's character has now gone from being a glorified Stark Trust Fund kid to having to live on his own means while juggling crime fighting. Well done, MCU brass. I mean, it took 3 guest appearances in the Infinity Saga and 3 self-titled movies to get the character right, but hey, you finally did it. Thank you. Also, it was great seeing J.K. Simmons back as J. Jonah Jameson. I think J.K. as J. Jonah in the Raimi Saga is the greatest comic book character adaptation ever. That's right, I said it. I said it and I don't care who knows. But that's a video for another time. This time around, he's less Capra-esque and is modernized as a conspiracy hot take personality. This was definitely taken from the Spider-Man PS4 game, where Jonah has a podcast that plays throughout, updating you to how Spider-Man's actions are negatively perceived. It's used to the same effect here, and is a great wrinkle to the unfolding of the story. My only real gripe with the movie, as with the previous movies, is Peter's continued usage of calling people Mr. and Sir. In this movie, they even use a rule of 3 or rule of 4 in this case. At first, Doctor Strange tells Peter he doesn't need to call him Sir anymore. Later, after Strange gets angry with Peter, he commands him to call him Sir again. And then finally, back when they're on good terms, Strange lets Peter call him Steven again. These sequences could have been better used to show Peter developing and utilizing some teenage angst. Instead of Strange barking at Peter, Peter should have pushed back and mocked him, telling him he doesn't take orders from King Arthur's Merlin or something. It could have shown the budding roots of that sarcastic Spidey that we all know and love. Why this sequence bothered me so much is because it was only used to show that Peter and Strange were on good terms, bad terms, and good terms again, which we didn't need any help figuring out. We reach the climax of this movie and Peter still needs to be given permission to call a fellow super peer by their name. Disappointing, but given how almost everything else regarding Peter was handled hit the mark, it's not the end of the world. The movie does have its share of issues. The first part of the film drags and the overall plot is basic and extremely convenient. Like I said, a video game structure. But damn it, I liked it. I've waited years for another great Spider-Man movie, and now I've seen one. As for MCU Spider-Man, is he the best Spider-Man or Peter Parker? No. I stand by everything I said in my previous video, and there are still things that I don't like about this version of Spidey, but they certainly course-corrected and were able to get a lot of things about the character right, not least of which was him finally standing on his own 2 feet and not being in the shadow of another MCU hero. Where they take him from here, I do not know. But in the meantime, as a fan like me, you gotta just take a win of having a great Spider-Man movie again. MCU Spider-Man is an example of why it's important to judge properties based on their merits, why it's appropriate to criticize when you think something is bad, and why it's important to acknowledge and praise when something is done right. Just being totally negative or blindly standing for everything is a shallow way to approach entertainment. For me, this movie brought back the feeling of what it was like to be, as Stan Lee would say, a true believer. Stay blessed.